Hello everybody, and welcome back to Disney News Channel. On this episode of Love It or Destroy It, we're going to rank every episode of Good Luck Charlie Season 1. Let's get started with Take Me Out to the Ball Game. This is one of my least favorite episodes from Season 1. Simply because of how mean-spirited it is, especially with the character of Grandpa Duncan. He's just the meanest, most unhappy character in the whole show. However, this episode does have one thing going for it at the very end, where Grandpa Duncan comes home with Teddy, and Bob and Teddy have a moment together. The only reason it's not higher is that moment between Teddy and Bob was at the very end, and nothing between them happens throughout the episode. Next, let's talk about Boy Meets Girl. I would also have to put this in Destroy It. This episode introduces a brand new character, Joe, who is my least favorite character in the whole show, mainly because she's just a one-note stereotypical bad guy. She has a lot in common with Gabe, but unlike Gabe, we never really get to know her as a person, and we never know why she's doing these things. And that's especially bad considering all the awful things Joe is doing, like beating up Gabe, who is basically on our side. Next, let's talk about Up a Tree. Now finally we can put this one in Love It. Mainly because of how great the dynamic between PJ and Teddy is, and their character story in this episode. It's just really great seeing these two learning to get along and to stick with it for Charlie. And yeah, Bob is incredibly funny in this episode. And what's really amazing is that everybody has something to do here, and everyone contributes to the main plot. Next, let's talk about Charlie in Charge. Now, for me, it's a toss-up which one I dislike more between Boy Meets Girl and Charlie in Charge. I think that Charlie in Charge is just a little bit worse, because in Boy Meets Girl, Joe has a little less of an appearance than Charlie in Charge. And yeah, so we get to see a little more of her in this episode, although she's still just as unlikable and uninteresting as she was in Boy Meets Girl. Other than that, the rest of the episode is just fine. Nothing good, nothing amazing, nothing's really funny, it's just the episode. Next, let's talk about Snow Show. Now, this is another great episode, simply because of how real the conflict is. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the times in the other episodes, the conflict only comes in at the very end and doesn't really mean anything in the long run. However, this episode gets at the conflict right at the beginning and really plays with it. Like, I was actually wondering if this is gonna change the show forever, and if Amy and Bob were actually gonna break up in this episode. Not only that, but each character has their own side plot, but they still all come together at the end and contribute to the main plot. And of course, the wedding scene is just adorable. And the opening for this episode is one of my favorites. Now let's talk about The Curious Case of Mr. Dabney. Now this episode has one of the funniest plots ever, with Gabe and PJ believing Mrs. Dabney to be a murderer who killed her husband. Now, we all know that Mrs. Dabney is not a murderer and that Gabe and PJ are just being stupid. There's no way they would kill someone off like that on a kid's show. But they still made a lot of great jokes about it, and I also think what makes it work is that they're not really taking it that seriously. Like, the episode knows that Mr. Dabney is okay and that Mrs. Dabney did not kill him. Now, let's talk about Gold Bite's dog. I would probably just put this in... No, I'll put it in nostalgic. Gold Bite's dog. This is the beginning episode for sort of a 3-part arc with Spencer cheating on Teddy and then her getting over it in the next 2 episodes. However, what really bothers me about this episode is that Spencer's betrayal was not really set up at all. The only thing they do to set it up, or to hint at what he's doing, is Charlie biting him, and then Ivy saying maybe he's hiding something. Also, we don't really get a lot of Spencer's POV, so, in the next 2 episodes, I'll talk more about that in those episodes. But I don't really feel bad for him or side with him when he comes to Teddy saying, "Please give me another chance." So, speaking of those episodes, why don't we just get those out of the way while we're here? So, the first one is, we just gotta find it. Here's one of them. Teddy's Broken Heart Club. That's the one that comes after. I'd say it's acceptable. Honestly, if you ask me, I think Gold Bite's dog and Teddy's Broken Heart Club should have just been combined together into one episode. Into just like 1 hour-long special. Especially because in this episode, the story really drags along. And I really didn't think we needed like a full trilogy of episodes to really see Teddy get over Spencer. And the song they sing about Spencer in this episode is just cringe. And as I said before, the whole trilogy is told from Teddy's perspective. And Spencer is hardly in any of the episodes. So, in this episode, and the next one, when he's trying to reason with Teddy and apologize, I don't really buy his apology or believe they should get back together, since honestly Spencer was kind of an idiot. Quickie Chickie, this is a good episode. once again, I'm glad, PJ and Teddy's relationship gets a focus in this episode. And I think it's really nice what Teddy did, sacrificing that job she wanted for PJ. Other than that, I would say this is a pretty good episode all around. Now, let's talk about Sleepless in Denver. Honestly, this episode is hilarious, okay? Gabe's sleepover friends all have an amazing gimmick, and honestly, I wouldn't really say this is one of the deepest or best story episodes, but it's just fun and hilarious. So, anyway, let's talk about Study Date. I'd say it's a good episode. I don't really care for the whole Teddy and Spencer relationship, since, they don't really delve into what makes them tick or why they like each other. But I would say that the stuff with PJ Bob at the hospital is pretty funny, and, there's still some nice scenes, including the ending of this episode, with the talk that Teddy and Gabe have on the porch at Mrs. Dabney's. Now let's talk about driving Mrs. Dabney. I would say that I would put around there. And again, this is a pretty good episode. It's the season 1 finale. And the ending stuff with Bob and Teddy and their conflict, I found that to be absolutely heartwarming and ended the season on a really, really great note. And again, the stuff with PJ and Gabe, I found that to be pretty funny. And the song that PJ and Gabe sing, it was pretty cringy, but like the good kind of cringy, where it's like sweetly cringy. Now let's talk about Kit and Caboodle. I don't have a lot to say about this episode. It's just kind of boring. It's just kind of boring, and it's not great. It's not bad. Nothing in this episode is I find to be mean-spirited or say, I don't think that character should have done that. But at the same time, it's not like anything was particularly funny or exciting or really got my attention. So anyway, next let's talk about Double Whammy. I would probably put that around here. And I feel like this episode, it's kind of like Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and how mean-spirited it is. However, considering what we know about Amy, I feel like I can kind of excuse some of her pushy behavior. And considering what we know about Teddy, I can understand why she wouldn't want to become the mascot. Unlike Grandpa Duncan, who we don't know anything about, so it's kind of hard to excuse that behavior from him. Now let's talk about But Darling Duncans. Again, I would say it's a little mean-spirited. However, I wouldn't exactly describe it like that, since, I feel like this whole episode is more of like a moment of weakness for Teddy, and it's kind of fun to see her be the rebel for an episode. And the other stuff in this episode is pretty good, not bad at all. Now, let's talk about Baby Comeback. I would also say this is a good episode. Nothing too special. PJ's PJ, so I understand why he would accidentally forget Charlie at the park. And the rest of the episode is about Teddy and Gabe and PJ looking for her, trying to bring her home. But it doesn't really have too much emotional weight behind it. Except for one moment in the truck when Teddy said to PJ that, we're all responsible for this. Which, it was just a nice moment between the two and kind of just added to their dynamic a little bit. Now, let's talk about Dance Off. I would also put this in acceptable. I don't really care for the whole Spencer-Teddy relationship. So, you can't really get behind her with her panicking about asking him to the dance. However, I feel like the other plot with Gabe, about going to Gabe's open house at school, I thought that was pretty well done and kind of funny. Now, let's talk about... let's finish off that trilogy and talk about Teddy's Roundabout. And I'll just put it in nostalgic. Honestly, I'm just kind of glad that was the final episode of that drawn-out trilogy. And I really feel like this wasn't that important of an episode, since I feel like she kind of got over Spencer in the previous episode. And now they're kind of just milking it for what it's worth. And I feel like the other plots in this episode just don't really go anywhere. Now, let's talk about Blanket Goes Bye-Bye. We'll put this episode here and love it. This is just a really, really sweet episode. The stuff with Bob and Amy and their anniversary, I think that stuff's adorable. And, the other stuff back at the house is pretty good. I don't really have too much to say on that other part of the plot. And the stuff with Bob and Amy is just good. It's just sweet. It's a nice little love story for their anniversary. Now, let's talk about Charlie is One, and I would put this one in nostalgic. This is kind of like a retelling of the day Charlie was born, and Amy's character is absolutely hysterical in this episode, just with the way she's dealing with her pregnancy. And again, I kind of like how there's not really a subplot in this episode, and that everyone is just contributing to that one endgame of getting to the hospital to see Charlie. And the ending, I have to admit, is pretty sweet. And the ending in the present day is also really good, with two of the characters returning. I won't say who they are for spoiler purposes, but it's a really sweet ending for both of the stories. Now, let's talk about Duncan's Got Talent. We'll put this one in acceptable, I would say. I would say there's just nothing really too special about this episode. And again, the conflict between Spencer and Teddy, I feel like I've said that a lot this video, is just kind of weird, and I hate the whole Lyle reveal story, which this is like a textbook example of that. So now let's talk about Teddy's Little Helper. And I would say this is a pretty sweet episode. And I love the whole arc for Teddy about understanding not everyone's gonna like him. Not everyone's gonna, not him, not everyone's gonna like her. But, I just feel like, the teacher in this episode, I believe his name is Mr. Schuster. No, not Mr. Schuster, Mr. Dingwall. I just don't feel like he's much of a character and just a little too gimmicky. I just wish we had a little more time to get to know him as a character. Now let's talk about pushing buttons. I'd put it in nostalgia. I think that's a good place for it. I would say this is a pretty good episode. I would say that we all know that Gabe's bike wasn't stolen. But, I guess it's still kind of a fun mystery for the rest of the cast to try and figure out. But again, I just wish there was a little more to this episode. And this actually is the kind of episode that I wish did have a subplot, just to add a little more depth to the episode. Now let's talk about Charlie Goes Viral. I'll put that in good. I could kind of see why Teddy might be a little bit embarrassed by her family. But, I wish there was also a bit of an arc for the rest of the family about how their behavior might drive people away from them. However, it all kind of works out in the end, and I am happy that Spencer does come over at the end, and they do have a little bit of a moment together, which I think is pretty nice. Anywho, let's finish this off here. Charlie Did It is, I'd say it's a pretty good episode. It's pretty funny. I do kind of like the whole story about Hugo taking the Charlie and the rest of the family captive at the grocery store because Charlie stole a pair of sunglasses without them knowing. But again, I wish there were a few more story beats in this episode and a little more happened. Anywho, that's my ranking for season 1, and as you can see, it's a pretty meh to average season. But I do hope that Good Luck Charlie season 2 will be a little bit better and they'll finally work out some of the kinks. Anywho, that's all for now, guys. Stay tuned for more videos coming soon.